Hello, everyone. My name is Jenna Shrewsbury, and I am the Program Assistant for TRIO Student Support Services here at Wenatchee Valley College. Today, I am going to go into a little bit about study skills, different techniques, and things to consider when you're trying to develop good study habits. So today, we'll talk a little bit about time management for studying, your study environment, and some different note-taking tips and strategies. Before we get into it, take a moment to consider some of these questions. If you need to pause the video and write them down, feel free. So how do you study and where do you study? Does it feel productive, and do your grades support that it feels productive? If it does feel productive, what are you doing right? What are some things and strategies that are working out for you? And if not, what do you think you could improve? Do you have a time management strategy for your study time? And what materials and/or methods work for you? Starting out, we'll talk a little bit about time management here. Dylan sent out a wonderful email back in May that went over time management and self-care. If you can't find that email, definitely let me know. I'm happy to forward it along to you, but there are some great different strategies and things you can think about in that workshop. So because she has already covered time management, I am going to focus more on time management specifically when you are actually studying. My main suggestion is to study for short intervals and take breaks often. So one technique that I think is really great and have read a lot about that works well for me is called the Pomodoro technique. This technique is pretty widely used by not only college students and people who are studying, but also professional writers and people who are otherwise having issues getting started with whatever task or work they need to do. So the basic idea is that you take a timer, set it for 25 minutes, and focus in on the task that you're doing. When those 25 minutes are up, you take a 5-minute break, and then if you need to continue your task, you just start over and do another 25 minutes. The reason that this works really well is it gets you going, and you can table any distractions you have for those 25 minutes. If you're having a hard time pulling yourself away from social media right now, it's a little bit easier to say, okay, in 25 minutes, I can check my phone. I can handle 25 minutes. If you don't feel motivated after that, you can give yourself permission to take a break because you at least tried. Usually, at least in my experience, once you get started, 15, 20 minutes into that first round, it really motivates you to write more and do more or study more. More suggestions are to review both new and old material. And I'll explain that a little bit more on the next slide here. Another thing to consider is spacing your studying out. It's really easy to say that you should do this. I know it's a lot harder to make it happen, but it is one of the more effective ways for you to actually retain and remember things. Cramming for a couple hours before a test usually doesn't pan out. There are exceptions, of course, but if you actually want to learn material and be able to retain it and use it in the future, whether on a test or just in your life, spacing it out and studying over different intervals really makes a big difference. So here's some support for that. There was a German researcher in the early 1900s who studied memory and forgetting, and his research still holds up today. His name was Ebbinghaus, and he was able to show us that you don't retain a lot of information immediately after you learn it. Immediately after a class or a lecture, you are only going to remember about 75% of what you just learned. And that's mostly because there's so much information, it's hard for you to keep it all in your brain. Even if you are doing your very best, you're only likely to remember about 75% of it. So the blue line in this graph here shows you what happens if you just attend a class and walk away and don't study or review it. Within about an hour, we forget about half of what we learned. Within a day, it's barely anything, 20% of what you learned. So some strategies you can use to try to combat this are to review the material. So the red line there shows you what can happen if you review material immediately after class. If you, within 10 minutes, just sit down and look at your notes or review highlights of what's happened, you are so much more likely to remember it the next day. Of course, if you don't review it again after that, you're still over time not going to remember all that much, but you'll do a little bit better than if you hadn't reviewed immediately after class. The yellow line here shows you what happens if you review your material the next day, so within about 24 hours. That's a huge difference from just not reviewing it or reviewing it only the next day. And then again, you can see the green line's a week later, the blue line is a month later. Basically, just the more you review it, the more likely you are to retain it. And if you space those things out, it's going to work out really well for you. So let's shift gears a little bit and focus on your study environment. It is more important now than ever to free your space of distractions and establish some kind of boundaries and routines. So if you're studying, try to turn your phone off or put it in the other room. If you're using your phone to study, maybe put on do not disturb mode. Just do something to try and limit those pop-ups and distractions and things that can really get in the way of you focusing. And if you are living with other people, it's also helpful to let them know that you're studying and that you need some space or boundaries. You know, talk to your parents or siblings or whoever you're living with and just say, hey, I'm going to go in this room for the next hour and study. I'd appreciate it if you gave me a little bit of space. It usually works out pretty well as long as you're nice about it. Another thing to consider is making your space comfortable. You know, if you're studying in a room, make your bed. Change out of your pajamas to sort of give yourself those cues to say, okay, it's time to work. And don't let this be a distraction and excuse to just procrastinate and focus on cleaning. But you want to be able to study in an environment that's going to work for you. Find a space for you that works and make it as comfortable as you can and useful as you can for learning. So let's pause again here. I'd like you to think about two things that distract you from effective studying. What are some habits maybe you have or things in your environment that are distracting? And what are some steps you can take to limit these distractions? Okay. And last, I'm going to talk about note-taking. Personally, I have found that interacting with your notes makes a huge difference. I'm a very color-oriented person, so I like to use highlighters and colored sticky notes and flags and write with different color pens. You know, it works for me. But find something that works for you. Make your notes useful and make them something that's pleasant to interact with, because the more you interact with them and take other extra notes or do things after class, the more likely you are to actually learn and remember the information on the page. So two note-taking strategies that I think are pretty useful are the outline method. This is kind of a standard one. Unlike most people, for some reason, I did not learn this method in high school, and I was pretty upset when I learned that I missed out. So this is something that if you are not familiar with, I included some instructions in your email, but it should be kind of second nature. It doesn't work for every single topic. You know, math notes probably won't work as well in an outline, but it is a good tool to learn and something that will probably help you in most of your classes. More what I want to talk about is a method that I learned when I was attending the University of Washington, and I wish I had learned a lot sooner. The Cornell Method is a note-taking method that helps you not only take notes in class, but also study for them later. So the idea is on the right-hand side here, you take your notes like in class like you would normally, and then afterwards, when it's time to review, you summarize the things that are written on that page at the bottom, and in the left-hand side, you write down different cues that will help you study. So you might write vocabulary words that are related to information on the right side of the page. You might think about potential exam questions. How might a statement that you wrote on the right-hand side that your instructor was talking about be used as an exam question? Then the idea is that you just cover up the information on the right-hand side of the page when you're studying, and you look at those cues and try to answer your own questions or talk about the vocabulary words or things like that. It's a really useful technique. It's a little hard to explain over this medium, but there's lots of information online about it. I included a little bit of information in the email I sent. And again, I'm always happy to explain it in more detail. I was just really excited when I first learned about it, and I wish I'd heard about it a lot sooner. So I wanted to share it with you as well. So in review, manage your time effectively for studying. So make sure that you're actually studying in a way that's smart and works for you rather than just staring at your book for hours on end. Review your material more than one time, kind of space those things out, and it'll help you remember them a lot better in the long term. Make your study environment comfortable and interact with your notes and make them work for you. If you have any questions or if you have any study techniques that you think are great that I didn't mention, feel free to let me know. You can always reach out to us at TRIO, or you can reach out to me directly, but have a great rest of your day.